My name is Camille Barrett. I'm 31 years old, and as I stood motionless in the hallway of my own home, I watched the ghosts of my past step across the marble floor like they belonged there. After 10 years of silence, 10 years of being erased, of being called an embarrassment, of being cast out, they were here. My family. Inside my house, laughing, directing luggage, admiring ocean views like they'd earned them. It wasn't a confrontation I had planned. Honestly, I'd almost left town for the week, let the agency handle the rental, like they usually did when I traveled. But something had shifted when I saw the reservation Barrett family reunion booked under my father's name through a luxury broker who never revealed property owners. Something inside me clicked, hardened. I couldn't let them come here, take over this space I'd built from the ashes of what they destroyed and pretend I didn't exist. So I stayed. They didn't know I lived here, of course. They thought this was just another high-end beach house they'd found for their little reunion. The Barretts love their appearances. No gathering is complete without coordinated linens and the perfect ocean backdrop. I imagined Margaret, my mother, reviewing real estate listings with her usual ruthlessness, checking for things like discreet elegance and heritage finishes. What she hadn't known was that behind the clean architecture and coastal light was me. It had taken me a decade to get here, physically, emotionally, financially. A decade since I'd walked away from them with nothing but an $800 graduation check and a secondhand camera. No savings, no plan, just hunger. And now, here I was, homeowner founder of a boutique photography studio that catered to architects and developers from Manhattan to Miami, known for turning even the plainest listing into something desirable. I'd become the very thing my parents insisted I'd never be stable, respected, and entirely self-made. And they were about to eat shrimp cocktail in my kitchen. Through the hallway security monitor, I watched them settle in. My father, Russell Barrett, in pressed linen slacks, surveyed the open floor plan with that same appraising look he used on land deals. My mother moved behind him like a designer ghost, adjusting a vase I had placed intentionally off-center. Nathan. My older brother came in with his wife and their 2 kids, Maya, among them the teenage girl who barely remembered me but still carried my eyes. Elise arrived last, trailing her perfect husband and 3 children, a designer tote swinging from her elbow. They looked like a magazine spread, poised, coordinated, enviable. The Barrett legacy alive and gleaming under the chandeliers I'd chosen myself. And me, I was behind the scenes, watching, listening, judging. One of the first things they did, of course, was begin decorating the house with their own memories. Family photos appeared on the console table near the stairs, Elise's wedding. Nathan's promotion dinner, a trip to Nantucket I hadn't been invited to. My mother pulled out a group photo from a ski lodge vacation, and I almost smiled, until she casually slid that frame in front of another, an older photo that included me, hidden just like I'd been for the last 10 years. They'd come to celebrate 40 years of marriage, or so the caption on my mother's Facebook had claimed. Looking forward to our humble family reunion by the sea, just quality time with the people who matter most. I'd stared at that sentence for a long time. The people who mattered most. Apparently, I still didn't. I hadn't been angry at first. More stunned, maybe, but watching them now inhabiting my home, placing their feet on my floors, eating off my plates, something primal began to churn. It wasn't rage, it was colder than that, sharper, like glass in my throat. They didn't know yet, but they would. I had upgraded the house's security system earlier that month, part of a routine I kept for high-profile clients who sometimes use the space. Cameras in all shared areas, including the deck where they now gathered for lunch, praising the catering, talking about their cruise next spring. Not once did anyone mention my name. Not a remember when Camille used to love the ocean, not even a ghost of memory. It was as if I had died quietly and they had closed the chapter without blinking. Until Maya. I was standing near the monitor in my home office when I heard her voice. "Whatever happened to Camille?" she asked during a lull in conversation. Her tone wasn't accusatory, just curious. Innocent, even. She used to take all the best pictures. Silence followed, thick and instant. "That's not an appropriate topic," Margaret said coolly. "I was just wondering she made her choices? Russell interrupted, his voice like granite. And we don't need to discuss it further. Maya's face fell, but she said nothing else. I shut off the monitor, my hand shaking. Later that night, I walked down to the beach. My beach. The stretch of shoreline that Evelyn had loved, that I had inherited, that I had earned with every hour of struggle, every wedding I shot for too little pay, every sleepless night in a shoebox apartment in Brooklyn. The tide rolled in like breath, slow, patient, inevitable. I wasn't afraid to face them. Not anymore. Tomorrow, I would walk into that house in the middle of their carefully curated reunion, and I would say the one thing they never expected to hear again. Hello, I live here. And this time, I wouldn't be the one to disappear. I used to think invisibility was a superpower, something mysterious, even noble. But when you're born into a family like mine, invisibility is just the baseline. The Barretts didn't scream or slam doors. We didn't erupt. We erased. Growing up in the Barrett household meant understanding the architecture of expectations. My father, Russell Barrett, ran a commercial real estate firm with the kind of grip that made junior partners flinch. My mother, Margaret, didn't need to run anything. Her domain was perception. Every dinner was a performance, correct silverware, correct posture, correct conversation. And, of course, the correct children. Nathan, the eldest, was a prodigy in khakis. He spoke early, tested high, and was rewarded with everything from debate medals to a spot at Dartmouth. Elise, the youngest, was the beauty. Even as a child, she had that frozen-in-time elegance people described as poised. She married well, of course, the son of one of my father's oldest clients, cementing herself as both an asset and a validation. And then there was me, the middle one, the blurry one. I wasn't a rebel exactly. There's no room to rebel when no one's really watching. But from the age of 7, I started seeing the world differently. While Nathan dissected political speeches and Elise choreographed her birthday parties, I wandered around the house with a disposable camera. Not the kind with the pop-up flash and sleek design. Mine was clunky orange and came from a pharmacy bin. A gift from my grandmother, Evelyn, the one member of the family who'd ever spoken to me like I was whole. "You've got an eye, Camille," she told me once, patting my head gently. That's something no one can teach. I took photos of everything. The way sunlight pooled at the corners of our sunroom rug. The curve of steam rising from a tea kettle. Marta, our housekeeper, humming quietly as she folded napkins with military precision. It wasn't art to anyone else. But to me, it was the only way I felt like I existed. The only way to prove I was there. My mother would glance at the prints drying on my desk and smile thinly. It's a nice hobby, she'd say, rearranging the stack of books I'd left on the credenza. But don't let it distract you from real goals. Real goals. That phrase followed me for years, like a leash. When I entered high school, it became clear that Russell had plans for me, plans involving spreadsheets, shareholder meetings, and phrases like market stabilization. My aptitude for numbers didn't help. The more I understood light metering and ISO settings, the more my father saw business acumen. I didn't have the heart to tell him that I only loved math because it helped me take better pictures. So I compromised. Or tried to. I applied to NYU under their business program. I smiled through the congratulatory dinners. I accepted the internship at a well-known marketing firm that Russell secured through a handshake and a favor. But beneath all of it, I was still slipping away between the cracks. I registered for photography electives under a different department code. I spent hours in the darkroom after econ lectures. I'd leave networking mixers early, darting across campus to catch the golden hour from the rooftop of Tisch Hall. For 4 years, I led a double life on paper, a Barrett. In my heart, someone else entirely. The unraveling began at a restaurant called Langdon and Monroe, a place with velvet booths and enough crystal to make you feel like breathing too hard might set off an alarm. We were there to celebrate my graduation. My parents looked proud. Elise looked bored. Nathan had flown in from D.C. with a monogrammed tie and that shiny lawyer-brushed confidence. They toasted my bright future in brand strategy. The appetizers arrived. And then I spoke. "I'm not taking the internship," I said quietly but clearly. "I'm going to pursue photography full-time. I've been accepted into a mentorship program, one of the best. The silence was sudden and exacting. My father's expression didn't change, but the air around him did like a room had dropped 10 degrees. My mother blinked once then again. Elise stared at her champagne. Nathan let out something between a laugh and a cough. Finally, my father placed his wine glass down and folded his hands. "Don't be absurd," he said. "You start at Weatherby Consulting next month. It's already been arranged. I've already declined the offer," I replied. The conversation that followed wasn't a fight. It was a demolition, methodical, clean, emotionless. They cited failure rates for freelance artists, quoted stats about millennial unemployment. My mother shook her head like I'd confessed to joining a cult. "If you go down this path," Russell said at last, "you do it without our support. Financial or otherwise. We've invested too much." Margaret added, voice clipped. "We won't stand by and watch you waste it." I remember thinking, they're talking about me like I'm an asset that depreciated. 2 days later, I packed everything I owned into my 008 Civic, mostly closed some lenses, and a used Nikon DSLR. The graduation money I had left after textbooks and rent was $800. It was not enough for a deposit on an apartment. It was barely enough for gas and 2 weeks in a hostel. Nathan watched me load the car from the front porch, his arms crossed. "They'll get over it," he said. But the way he looked at me, he didn't believe it. Elise didn't even come downstairs. As I pulled away from the driveway for what I thought would be the last time I glanced at the house through the rearview mirror, it was perfectly lit, perfectly manicured, a mausoleum of expectation. They didn't yell. They didn't cry. They just turned away. And I drove into the city like a ghost that had been denied a headstone. No one followed. No one called. They had erased me with the same precision they applied to dinner menus and holiday cards. My name wasn't just forgotten. It was forbidden. Like I'd never existed. But I was still here, and I still had that camera. New York didn't care who you were before. That was both its cruelty and its mercy. In the first months after I left home, I learned the unglamorous truth about chasing your dream. Most days, it looked like waiting tables at a place where the manager called you sweetheart but docked your tips if you forgot to smile. It looked like standing on your feet for 12 hours, then dragging yourself back to a shared walk-up in Brooklyn where your roommates threw parties on Tuesdays and never cleaned the bathroom. It looked like nights lying awake on a twin mattress shoved in a corner, staring at the ceiling with aching legs and a hunger in your gut that wasn't just about food. But it also looked like sunrises through dirty windows and photographing the way light fell over someone's chipped mug or tangled bedsheets. It looked like hope in the smallest possible measure. I rented a room the size of my parents' guest bathroom in a 6th-floor walk-up where the radiator groaned like a dying animal and the front door never quite latched right. The apartment had 3 other tenants, none of whom remembered my name, but all of whom remembered to label their almond milk. During the day, I poured coffee in a cafe near Columbia, where I learned to spell names phonetically and developed a talent for reading people's moods before they even reached the counter. At night, I worked coat check at a bar downtown, trying not to cry when people handed me their designer jackets without looking me in the eye. Weekends were for shooting anything, everything. Events for friends of friends, headshots for struggling actors' birthday parties in cramped apartments with bad lighting. I didn't have studio gear or soft boxes or a proper flash, just a secondhand Nikon and the stubborn belief that if I could keep showing up, something might change. The first holiday season was the worst. Thanksgiving came and went without a word. I called my parents' number from a payphone outside the cafe on Christmas morning. It rang 13 times before it cut off. No voicemail, no callback. I tried again on New Year's Eve, then again on my birthday in March. Eventually, I stopped trying. What hurt most wasn't the silence. It was the fact that it felt so easy for them. Nathan sent a birthday text that first year. No punctuation, no emoji, just happy birthday? Cam. He met me for coffee once in Midtown. He looked uncomfortable the whole time, checking his watch like he had a train to catch. They just need time, he said, stirring his espresso with unnecessary vigor. You know how they are about the family image. I didn't ask why maintaining that image required my disappearance. Elise didn't reach out at all. By the second year, even Nathan's texts stopped. I found out my grandmother had passed from an online obituary. Her name was Evelyn too, the one who gave me my first camera. She'd been in hospice for months. No one told me. At the bottom of the obituary, it listed surviving family members. My name wasn't there. They hadn't just turned their backs. They were rewriting the story as if I'd never existed. I remember staring at that screen sitting on the fire escape in my pajamas with a cigarette someone had handed me at a rooftop shoot. I didn't smoke, but I held it anyway because the world felt warped and unrecognizable, and I needed to feel something sharp. There was no drama, no confrontation, no big shouting match that would someday become a cautionary tale at therapy, just a slow, methodical disappearance, a quiet, undaughtering. Still, I kept going. I built a website with borrowed HTML code and edited everything in free trial software until I could afford better. I bartered photos for dental work, for headshots, for website banners. I learned how to pitch clients, how to invoice, how to charm a wedding planner without sounding desperate. Every time I sent out a cold email or showed up to shoot an event I wasn't paid for, it was like throwing a flare into the sky. I'm here. I'm still here. Then the break. A high-end wedding photographer I followed religiously posted on Facebook that his second shooter had called out sick the morning of a big event. Need backup ASAP. Hamptons venue, 12-hour gig, pays $100 flat. DM me if available. I replied before I even finished reading the post. The job was everything and nothing. The ceremony ran late. The lighting was terrible, and by the end of the night, my arms ached from lugging equipment I didn't understand. But I showed up early, stayed late, and didn't complain when the bride's mother snapped at me for blocking the view. At 2 a.m., as we packed up gear in the back of his SUV, the photographer looked at me and said, "You've done this before." "No," I admitted, "but I want to." His name was Julian Miles, tall, sarcastic, always in black. He didn't believe in compliments, but he noticed everything. Julian didn't offer mentorship out of charity. He didn't have the time or the temperament for that, but he saw the fire in me and he respected that. Over the next year, I became his second shooter at weddings that looked like magazine spreads. I learned more than just composition and lighting. I learned business, contracts, licensing, client psychology. I learned how to price myself, how to present myself, how to protect myself. Real estate. Julian said one night reviewing my growing portfolio, "That's where the steady money is. People get married once, but houses sell year-round." He introduced me to a realtor friend who needed listing photos for a one-bedroom in Williamsburg. The commission was tiny, but I treated it like a Vogue shoot. I made that shoebox apartment look like a sanctuary. The realtor was impressed. She referred me to 3 more agents. Within 6 months, I had a reputation. Not big, but solid, reliable. People started asking for me. 2 years in, I landed my first luxury listing, a $4.2 million penthouse near Central Park. The owner, a silver-haired woman in a crisp linen dress, watched me work in silence. When I finished, she said, "You see angles others miss." Her name was Evelyn Rhodes. She was 70 sharp as broken glass and had built her publishing empire from scratch. She became a client, then a mentor, then something I didn't even know I needed, proof that someone could see me without trying to mold me. Evelyn hired me to photograph her properties up and down the coast. A mountain lodge in Aspen, a hideaway in San Francisco. But her favorite was a sprawling glass and stone beach house in the Hamptons. "My children hate it," she told me, walking barefoot across the sand. "They think it's too remote." But that's the point, darling. Distance clarifies things. 6 months later, she was gone. Lung cancer. Quick. Unceremonious, just like her. I didn't expect anything, not an heirloom, not even a thank you note. So when her lawyer called me 3 weeks after the funeral, I thought maybe she'd left me a camera, a book, something symbolic. Instead, he slid a deed across the desk. "She left you the house," he said, along with a fund for upkeep and taxes for 5 years. I stared at the paper, waiting for the trick. Why I managed. She included a letter. It was short, in Evelyn's unmistakable scrawl, Camille. "You see the world in ways my family never will. This house deserves someone who understands beauty. Make it yours. But more importantly, make it work for you. I built my life turning vision into value. Now, it's your turn. E.R." I walked out of that law office with shaking hands and a key I hadn't earned in their eyes but had fought for in every other way. That house became my sanctuary, my studio, my signal flare. I named the company Barrett plus Rhodes, a small rebellion and a tribute. My parents never knew, not yet. But they were about to walk into that house for their big reunion, and I was finally ready to greet them. The night I moved into the Hamptons house, Evelyn left me. I cried for the first time in years, not because I was sad, not because I missed my family, but because I finally felt safe. Not physically. I'd been sleeping behind deadbolts and fire escapes for years. This was something else. A quiet, unshakable, knowing that no one could kick me out. Not anymore. I'd spent so long in survival mode that when I opened the French doors to the deck and heard nothing but the tide, brushing the sand, it felt like stepping into another world. I ran my fingers along the smooth banister, took in the echo of my footsteps on the hardwood, and whispered aloud, just to see what it sounded like in a house that was mine. That night, I didn't sleep much. I paced. I planned. I stared out at the sea and asked Evelyn, wherever she was, what she had seen in me that no one else ever had. By dawn, I had the name Barrett plus Rhodes, her legacy, my fight, a partnership in spirit. I built the company in that house with the same obsessive focus I'd used to survive Brooklyn. I converted the guest house into a studio with natural light from 3 angles. I invested in equipment I'd only dreamed of before tilt-shift lenses, drone rigs, a full editing suite. I hired 2 assistants, young women, like I once was trying to find footing in a city that didn't offer second chances. I didn't go on vacations. I didn't date. I didn't go back to the city unless it was for work. Every ounce of me was poured into my clients, developers, architects, designers with 7-figure budgets. I shot homes that looked like movie sets and made modest ones look like dreams. In time, the emails changed. Loved your work on the Sullivan renovation, would love to connect. Then came the magazine features, Hampton's monthly architectural digest, even Elle Decor. Clients stopped asking for references, they started asking for me by name. But with each new milestone came an ache that surprised me. It wasn't bitterness, it wasn't even sadness. It was the slow realization that no matter how far I'd come, there was still a part of me tethered to a family who had buried my existence like bad debt. Sometimes I'd walk the beach at night with a glass of wine, staring at the dark water and trying to remember what it felt like to be known by people who didn't want anything from me. I'd look through old photographs I'd taken as a child, images no one ever praised, no one ever kept, and wonder if they would have mattered if I'd been born into a different family. Then, one evening, that tether snapped. I'd just finished a shoot for a new boutique hotel near Montauk and was reviewing proofs in my home office when a notification popped up on my phone. It was from Instagram. S. Nathan Legal has posted for the first time in a while. I almost swiped it away, but something made me click. The photo was recent. Nathan and Elise stood with our parents on a stretch of beach, arms around each other, champagne flutes raised, matching white linen. The caption read, "Looking forward to the Barrett family reunion next month. 40 years of mom. Plus dad deserves something special by the sea, the fencing, the dune grass, the exact curve of the shoreline I walked every morning." They weren't just renting a beach house, they were renting my beach house. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd made a mistake. Maybe they had found a similar-looking property nearby, but then I spotted the detail no one else would have noticed: a piece of driftwood I'd propped artfully against the fence post. A signature I'd used in several of my brand shoots. They were coming, and they had no idea. My first instinct was to cancel the booking. I called Angela, the property manager who handled short-term rentals for me whenever I was traveling or hosting corporate clients. "They paid in full," she said. "High season rate, non-refundable. I can cancel, but they'll make noise." "They're my family," I said, flatly. "They haven't spoken to me in 10 years. Angela paused. "Well, that complicates things." She was being diplomatic. What she meant was, this could blow up. Refund disputes, bad press, maybe even legal nonsense if they claimed emotional distress. I thanked her and said I'd think about it, and I did, for days. I pictured myself flying out to LA, shooting a campaign, coming back a week later like nothing had happened. Let them use the house? Let them never know? But then I saw a new post this time from Margaret's Facebook account, looking forward to our humble little family gathering in the Hamptons. Nothing extravagant, just time with the ones who matter most. That line. The ones who matter most. Like she hadn't hand-delivered the decision to cut me out, like they hadn't told extended family I'd had a nervous episode and was in recovery. I felt it then. That cold, clear resolve I hadn't tasted in years. I wouldn't cancel the reservation. But I wouldn't leave either. This time I wouldn't disappear to make them comfortable. The week before they arrived, I had the security system upgraded. Not to spy, I told myself, but to ensure liability coverage if anything went wrong. I placed fresh white roses in the kitchen, adjusted the framed art in the living room, and laid out a stack of coastal photography books I'd shot myself, nothing too obvious. Just enough that if they paid attention, they might begin to feel something unfamiliar and unsettling. I reviewed every inch of the house, not out of vanity, out of principle. This wasn't just a home anymore, it was the final exhibit in a story no one believed I could write. And then they arrived. Started with Russell. He stepped out of the black SUV and surveyed the house with the eye of a man who once flipped foreclosures like playing cards. I watched from the monitor as he ran his hand along the marble counter in the kitchen, then checked the hinges on the patio door. Still inspecting, still controlling. Margaret entered next, directing the housekeeper on where to place the floral centerpieces they'd brought themselves. She adjusted the throw pillows I'd arranged, of course, and moved a sculpture 3 inches to the right. Nathan followed with his wife Marissa and their daughter Maya, now nearly 15 tall and thoughtful, her eyes sharp with the kind of quiet curiosity I once held. Elise and her family arrived last, hauling coordinated luggage kids bouncing around her legs, her husband already pacing for better cell signal. And then came the photos. My family, so practiced in presentation, started placing framed memories around the house like they were christening it, summer vacations, graduation portraits, black tie galas, me conspicuously absent in every single one. At one point, Maya picked up a dusty frame that had accidentally included a photo from my high school recital. I watched frozen as Margaret smoothly swapped it out and tucked the frame behind a stack of magazines, as if I had been an error, a glitch, a problem to be edited out. I turned off the monitor and sat in the quiet for a long time. Then I poured myself a glass of wine, walked down to the deck and stared out at the sea. My sea, and promised myself tomorrow I would walk through the front door. Not as a daughter, not as a stranger, but as the woman who owned the house. And this time, they'd have to decide if they still belonged. The first time I met Evelyn Rhodes, she asked me absolutely nothing about my portfolio. She stood at the far end of a sunlit hallway in a Manhattan brownstone she was preparing to list. Her arms crossed, her expression neutral. "You're not who I expected," she said. I blinked, unsure if I was supposed to apologize. "I mean that in a good way," she added, then turned on her heel. "Come." I followed her through a maze of rooms, walnut floors, crown molding, built-in bookshelves, still full of her late husband's first editions. "This house has been in my family for 60 years, she said. "But my children want to sell it fast and badly. I want photographs that don't lie, but don't sulk either." That was Evelyn. Everything had to have purpose. No fuss, no sentimentality, but God help you if you missed the light coming in at just the right angle. She watched me work for hours, didn't hover, didn't instruct. She just watched. Every so often she'd tilt her head like I was a test she was running in her mind, and she hadn't yet decided whether I passed. When I packed up to leave, she walked me to the door and said, "You see things other people don't? Don't ever let people who lack vision tell you how to frame the world." At the time, it felt like a nice quote. One of those things clients say to be gracious. But I kept hearing her voice every time I hesitated, every time I doubted my eye or my rate or my right to even be in the room. Within a month, she called me back for another property, then another, then 3 more. They weren't just homes. They were empires, each one a reflection of the life she'd built brick by brick. A converted textile mill in Boston, a minimalist villa in Santa Fe, a penthouse in Tribeca with hand-laid mosaic floors. I built a publishing house from scratch in the 70s, she told me over coffee once. Do you know what kind of men I had to outsmart back then? She sipped her espresso, the kind who thought Mrs. meant malleable. I didn't say much. I never did with Evelyn. You didn't have to fill the air. She preferred silence if it had texture. Eventually, our work relationship bled into something more. She'd invite me to dinners she hosted for up-and-coming creatives. I was always the youngest, often the quietest, but she made sure I was at the table. She'd slide books across the counter at me, The Architecture of Shadow's Women. Photographers of the 20th century business isn't a man's game. It's a mind game. She never said, "You remind me of myself." Evelyn wasn't that sentimental. But I felt it. One spring, she asked me to document her favorite personal spaces for what she called a legacy archive. It was a strange request. She didn't specify where the photos would go or if they were even for public view. But I didn't ask. I just packed my cameras and followed her across the country. The last stop on that list was the house in the Hamptons. When we pulled up, she said nothing for a full minute. Then she simply whispered, "This is where I feel most like myself." It wasn't the biggest house she owned, or the most expensive, but it was hers in a way the others weren't. She designed it herself. She told me, every window placed to catch the light at specific times of day, every piece of stone shipped from New England quarry beds. "My kids think it's too remote," she said, waving toward the stretch of private beach. "Too quiet." I told them that's because they've never built anything that required stillness. We spent 4 days photographing every room, every shadow, every reflection. She stood beside me for many of the shots, commenting not on angles, but on energy. "This house breathes," she said once, placing her hand lightly on the window pane. "Don't photograph it like a monument. Photograph it like a living thing." We were supposed to shoot more that summer, but Evelyn's health declined faster than anyone expected. Pancreatic cancer doesn't linger. She called me once from the hospital. "I won't be needing your lens much longer," she said, her voice thin but composed. "But I want you to know I'm not done watching your work." That was the last time we spoke. At her funeral, I stood in the back of a marble-walled cathedral watching her children pretend grief. Maybe that's unfair. Maybe they did grieve in their way, but I couldn't shake the sense that they were already calculating asset distribution, already rewriting her life in their version of what a woman like her should have been. None of them noticed me. None of them spoke my name. 3 weeks later, I sat in a midtown office while her lawyer, a man with glasses too big for his face, slid a thick folder across the desk. "Ms. Rhodes left you something." I expected a letter, maybe a signed print, something personal but small. Instead, there was a deed. "The house in the Hamptons. She left it to you," he said, along with a maintenance fund for 5 years. Property taxes, upkeep, all covered. I stared at the paper like it might combust in my hands. That has to be a mistake. He handed me a sealed envelope. Evelyn's handwriting still as firm as ever. "Camille, you understand beauty in a way my children never have. This house deserves someone who doesn't just maintain it, but listens to it. Make it your home. Make it work for you. I spent my life turning ideas into income. Now it's your turn. Don't apologize for seeing the world differently. That's your advantage. E.R." I wept in the stairwell for 20 minutes before I could breathe again. That house wasn't just a gift. It was proof. Proof that someone had seen me, not just tolerated me, not just said how nice, but really seen me. The way I framed light, the way I held silence, the way I turned spaces into feeling. It was the opposite of everything my parents ever taught me. Evelyn didn't need me to wear pearls or fit a mold. She didn't need me to smile at the right moments or stay quiet during conflict. She needed me to see. And in return, she gave. That house became the pulse of everything I'd spent my life trying to build. Not because it was big, not because it was beautiful, but because it had passed from one woman who refused to be erased to another. I didn't put my name on the mailbox. I didn't flaunt it, but I built my company from that studio. I designed branding packages for developers in Miami, Toronto, San Diego. I trained interns in that guest house. I hosted industry mixers on the deck, and for 10 years I lived freely, unapologetically, until the day the family who erased me rented the house they didn't know I owned, and the story came full circle. It started with the sound of tires crunching over the shellstone driveway. I had just finished reviewing a proofing gallery for a luxury client in Sag Harbor when I heard it, that slow, weighted rhythm of an oversized SUV pulling up like it belonged. And, in a sense, it did. My family had arrived right on time for their perfect little reunion. From the monitor in my office, I watched the door swing open in sequence. Russell stepped out first. Still tall, still rigid in posture, but grayer now and slower on the turn. He wore a crisp, white shirt tucked into navy slacks and a familiar expression expectation. The same look he wore walking through unfinished properties deciding what should be torn down. Margaret followed, sweeping out of the passenger side in a flowing cream cardigan that probably cost more than my first camera. She stood on the gravel for a moment, soaking in the property like she was about to bless it. Then, without pause, she began directing the delivery of their luggage, 3 oversized trunks and a dozen monogrammed garment bags. Of course. I didn't move, I didn't blink, I let them come. Next was Nathan, his hand on the small of Marissa's back as their daughter Maya stepped out beside them. She looked older now, maybe 14, maybe 15, with that loose-limbed grace of a teenager trying not to be noticed and yet desperately needing to be seen. She pulled her phone out, scanned the house, and said something I couldn't hear. Marissa laughed politely. Nathan checked his watch. Then Elise arrived. Her entrance was practically choreographed. Her husband opened the rear door and out she stepped in block heels and a champagne-toned jumpsuit sunglasses perched atop her head like a tiara. 3 kids spilled around her voices, bouncing in shrill unison. Elise hushed them once softly but sharply like she was on camera. Cousins, aunts. A few older family friends trickled in next, all of them touching the property like it was part of some shared past, like they'd earned the view. No one looked up at the camera nestled discreetly above the porch light. They didn't know I was watching, but I was. I watched Russell run his hand along the kitchen island soapstone matte finish, custom built by a local artisan I'd hired personally. I watched Margaret adjust the lilies I had placed in the living room, replacing them with imported roses she had delivered within the hour. I watched Nathan set up a Bluetooth speaker and start playing a soft jazz playlist called Barrett Legacy Moments. Then I watched them decorate. Family photographs came out first. Elise placing a silver frame on the hallway console, a candid from her engagement party. Margaret arranging a formal portrait from Nathan's graduation. A group shot from the ski lodge in Vermont before I left. In that photo, I stood near the back, my face half-turned, already fading from the center of the frame. Margaret picked up that one, held it for a second, then slipped it behind a stack of architecture books I'd staged on purpose. No hesitation. I wasn't just invisible, I was being curated out of my own life. The only one who looked even remotely curious about the house itself was Maya. She wandered the hall slowly, her fingers brushing along surfaces, her eyes taking in the photos on the walls, the ones I had taken. She stopped at one in particular, a black and white landscape I'd shot the first summer I moved in. Sunrise over the dunes, you could barely see the details, but it carried that soft sadness only early morning light can hold. She stared at it for a long time. Then she disappeared down the hallway again. That night, I didn't sleep. I paced. I watched them through the monitors in the kitchen and on the back deck. I listened through the security feed as they sat around the outdoor table drinking wine and reminiscing. They talked about Nathan's latest promotion, about Elise's husband's new investment in some luxury gym franchise, about Margaret and Russell's upcoming cruise to the Baltics. My name was never mentioned, not once, until Maya. During a lull in the conversation, I heard her voice soft, hesitant, but steady. Whatever happened to Camille? Everything stopped. You could hear the clink of a wine glass being set down too hard. She used to take all the pictures at our birthdays, Maya added, like she wasn't aware she'd just pulled a pin from a grenade. Margaret spoke first. That's not a conversation for the dinner table, darling. But I'm just asking. She made choices, Russell interrupted. Ones that led her away from this family. She was always nice to me, Maya mumbled. I remember. Enough, Margaret said, her voice lined with steel. I clicked off the audio. My hands were shaking. It shouldn't have hurt anymore. I had done the work, built the business, paid my taxes, been featured in 4 national magazines. I had the deeds, the invoices, the client list to prove my success. But somehow, hearing my name treated like a toxic substance spoken once, then scrubbed from the air, cut deeper than any shouted argument ever could. I walked out onto the deck. The night air was warm, the wind gentle. The moon hung low over the water, and the sea glowed silver under its light. This house had been my refuge, my studio, my sanctuary. It had been where I found my voice after a decade of being silenced. And now, it was full of people who once told me I was ashamed to the Barrett name. They didn't deserve to be comfortable. They didn't deserve to pretend. Tomorrow I would walk in, uninvited, unannounced, and entirely within my rights. I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't make a scene. I'd simply walk through the front door in the middle of their catered lunch look into the faces of the people who had written my eulogy a decade ago and say, "Hello, I live here. Let's see what they do with that." I chose the black dress on purpose, not because it was dramatic, but because it was simple, expensive, and unmistakably professional. Clean lines, no embellishments, paired with soft leather flats, a sleek ponytail, and a thin gold bracelet Evelyn once gave me, understated but unignorable. I looked like the kind of woman who didn't ask permission to be somewhere, the kind of woman who owned the house. Through the window I could see the whole family gathered on the deck. A catered lunch had been set out, crab salad, iced mint tea, slices of lemon tart, already plated. Margaret, of course, was holding court at the center of the table, gesturing with her wine glass like a diplomat at a summit. Russell sat at her right elbows on the table, listening to Nathan recap some corporate merger as if the SEC were listening in. Elise sat further down, laughing at something her husband said, though her smile was stiff around the edges. Maya leaned back in her chair, staring up at the sky, her plate barely touched. She looked like she belonged to the setting, but not to the moment. I waited until everyone had taken their first bites, until the tension of arrival had eased into that dangerous family rhythm, everyone playing their part, no one expecting disruption. Then I opened the door. The sound of my heels on the hardwood stopped the conversation mid-sentence. It was subtle at first, a lull in the noise like someone had hit mute. 12 heads turned in unison. I stepped onto the deck with my shoulders back, my expression composed, and said, "Hope I'm not interrupting." The silence was immediate and devastating. Margaret was the first to react. The crystal wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the deck, the shards scattering like startled birds. She didn't bend to pick them up. Russell stood, halfway his face, pale in a way I'd never seen before. Not angry, not confused, but afraid, or maybe just old. For a moment I saw the lines that hadn't been there 10 years ago, the slight tremble in his hand. Elise clutched her husband's arm like I was a hallucination. Nathan's voice broke the spell. Camille soft, as if he'd spoken my name in a dream and wasn't sure if it was real. I gave him a nod. "Hello, Nathan." The children had frozen mid-bite. Even they could feel it, this shift in atmosphere. The woman they'd heard only in whispers standing in the flesh before them. A myth with a pulse. Elise was the first to recover. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "How did you get in?" I tilted my head. "I live here." The words settled over the table like a fog. Heavy, inevitable. "That's not possible." Russell said, his voice low but firm. "We rented this property through Hampton Luxury Estates. It's part of their premium rotation. They manage the property when I travel," I said simply. I decided not to travel this week. Margaret's chair creaked as she slowly sat back down, her face unreadable. "You own this house." The question held layers. How, when? Why didn't we know? Yes, I answered. I walked further onto the deck, not asking permission. I didn't need it. The silence wasn't hostile anymore. It was unstable. People shifting in their seats. Spoons paused in midair. Maya's eyes wide and unblinking. Elise's husband leaned forward, confused. "Wait, you're the Camille." The one they said Elise elbowed him hard before he could finish the sentence. "What did they say?" I asked, mildly, eyes on Elise. No one answered. Then Maya stood up. She crossed the deck, stepped right up to me, and wrapped her arms around my waist in a hug so sudden and honest it cracked my composure. I blinked against the sting in my eyes. I knew it was you, she said, pulling back. Your photos are everywhere. I smiled. You've grown up. You look different too, she said. Stronger. She said it like it was a good thing. One by one, the rest of the family began to unfreeze. My Aunt Dorothy came forward, first kissed my cheek like we hadn't skipped a decade, and murmured, You look beautiful, sweetheart. My Uncle Paul shook my hand awkwardly. A few cousins waved from their seats, unsure of the protocol. Nathan stood and offered me a tentative hug. His arms were rigid, but his voice cracked when he said, You look, well, thank you, I said. Margaret remained seated, her posture perfect, her expression brittle. Her hands gripped a new wine glass like it might break too. Russell watched me carefully, as if trying to gauge if this was a threat or a negotiation. Please, Aunt Dorothy said, patting the empty chair beside her. Join us. There's plenty of food. Margaret flinched. I considered declining, walking away, letting them squirm. But this was my house, my rules. For once they would adjust to me. I'd like that I said taking the seat. The meal continued, but the energy had shifted. The conversation tiptoed into neutral topics. The weather, the view, the quality of the catering. No one looked me directly in the eye except Maya, who peppered me with questions about cameras and photography until her mother shushed her. Actually, I said, setting down my fork, I'd be happy to answer her questions. Photography is my career, after all. Margaret's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her napkin. Real estate photography, Russell asked. That's how you afforded this place. The implication was clear. This can't possibly be enough. Partly, I said, Barrett plus Rhodes handles architectural and real estate clients from New York to Miami. We have a strong roster of luxury developers and interior designers. But this house? I glanced around. It was left to me by a mentor. A woman who believed in my vision when others didn't. Margaret's face didn't move, but her throat worked hard around her next sip of wine. How fortunate, she said carefully. Yes, I replied, meeting her gaze. It was. Lunch ended without fireworks, just tension humming under every pleasantry. The children wandered off to play on the beach. The adults migrated inside. Elise stayed quiet, her fingers twisting her ring around and around. Her husband kept checking his phone. Russell lingered at the back of the deck, staring out at the horizon, his silhouette outlined against the water. I waited, knowing he'd speak eventually. He did. You built something impressive, he said without turning. Thank you. Not what I expected when you walked away. No, I said, but exactly what I intended. He nodded slow and heavy. Impressive, he repeated. Very impressive. And then he walked away, leaving me alone on the deck, surrounded by the echoes of a family who had tried to delete me and were now being asked to make room again. That night, the house was quieter than it had been in years. Camille stood by the open window of the guest suite, the sea breeze curling around her ankles, the sound of waves, steady and soothing. But inside she felt anything but still. The confrontation earlier, the stunned silence at her entrance, the stolen glances during lunch, they looped in her mind like an old film reel. She made her way downstairs, barefoot, past the guest bedrooms and down the hall to the kitchen. It was dimly lit, only the under-cabinet lights glowing faintly. She reached for a glass, turned the tap slowly. The hum of the refrigerator was the only other sound. A soft shuffle, then the creak of a floorboard. Nathan entered quietly dressed in lounge pants and a faded college sweatshirt, his hair tousled. He gave a small nod, gesturing to the fridge. Couldn't sleep either, Camille asked. He opened the door and pulled out a bottle of sparkling water. Too much noise in my head. She took a sip of water. What kind of noise? He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Guilt, mostly. Camille waited. They told everyone you had a breakdown, said you were in psychiatric treatment out west. It was Mom's way of controlling the narrative. Camille didn't react outwardly, but her fingers clenched slightly around her glass. I wanted to ask questions, Nathan continued. But honestly, it was easier to let it lie. Easier to pretend maybe it was true. I was busy, promotions, kids. I convinced myself it wasn't my place to pry. She nodded slowly. So I disappeared, and that was convenient for everyone. Yes, he admitted. But it wasn't right. Before she could respond, another figure emerged from the hallway. Elise, barefoot and wrapped in a soft silk robe, looked exhausted. Her mascara smudged her usual poise gone. She crossed to the pantry and pulled out the old cookie tin still holding her favorite chocolate wafers. "I knew you'd still keep these," she said quietly. Camille gave a small dry smile. "Some things don't change." Elise poured herself water and sat across from Camille. There was something fragile about her, as if a single word might break her open. "Tom is cheating," she said flatly. Camille blinked. "How long?" "Since before Maya was born." Nathan flinched. "I found messages," Elise said. "Multiple women, hotels. He stopped being discreet years ago, but Mom told me to keep the family name intact. That appearances were everything." Camille stared at her sister. For once, Elise didn't look polished or distant. She looked trapped. "Why haven't you left?" Elise shook her head. "Prenup. No financial cushion. I followed every rule they gave us. Married the right man. Had the children. Stayed thin, stayed pleasant. I'm 37 and I don't even have my own checking account." Nathan looked devastated. "You never told me it was that bad." Elise gave a sad smile. "What was the point? You were Dad's right hand, Mom's favorite. I figured you knew and didn't care." Camille leaned forward. "And now, why tell me now?" "Because you walked away," Elise whispered. "You built something on your terms. You became someone. And I'm realizing I never did." Camille said nothing. Elise reached across the table and touched her sister's hand. "I envied you, and I punished you for it." A long silence passed. Then came the voice. "Still awake, Margaret." She stood in the doorway, immaculate in a pressed robe, every hair in place. Her gaze moved over each of them, then settled on Camille. "May I speak with you alone?" Nathan stood first. Elise followed. They exited with hesitance, leaving Camille in the kitchen under her mother's cool gaze. Margaret walked to the breakfast nook, sat and folded her hands in her lap. Camille remained standing. "I didn't tell your father about this conversation. I won't, but I believe you deserve to hear something." Camille waited. Margaret looked at her hands. "Around the time you were conceived, your father and I were not aligned. He traveled often. There were long absences. I made a mistake." Camille felt her chest tighten. "A man, brief, regrettable. I never spoke of it again. But you were born 9 months later, and I have always wondered. You think Dad isn't my biological father?" Margaret didn't answer. She didn't have to. "Why now?" Camille asked, voice low. "Because watching you this week, seeing who you've become, I realized the distance he kept from you may not have been entirely about your choices." Camille stepped back, gripping the edge of the sink. Her mind was suddenly full of memories she had never questioned. The way Russell never attended her exhibitions. The way he spoke proudly of Nathan and Elise, but never her. The way he introduced her to colleagues without titles. "Does he know?" "I don't believe so," Margaret said. "But he suspects, and I think in some way that's shaped everything." Camille turned to the window. The night outside was still, but inside her a storm was building. "So I was cast out of the family not just for my career, but because I was never really part of it." Margaret flinched. "I never meant for that to happen." Camille faced her. "But you let it." They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Margaret stood, smoothing her robe. "Good night, Camille." She walked away, her steps perfectly measured as always. Camille remained in the kitchen, bathed in low light and revelation. She wasn't angry. Not yet. But something fundamental had cracked. And tomorrow, something new would begin. The morning after Margaret's confession, Camille rose before the sun. She dressed simply in a navy hoodie and linen pants, tied her hair back, and walked barefoot down the long wooden path to the beach. The sky was just beginning to change deep blue, surrendering to violet, then to a watercolor wash of pink and gold. She needed the sea, needed the rhythm of the waves to drown out the echo of Margaret's voice. Your father may not be your father. She had always sensed something broken in the way Russell looked at her, or didn't. The puzzle finally had a shape, but it wasn't a comfort. It was a fracture. She stood with her feet in the wet sand, watching the tide pull away and return, breathing with it. The sound of footsteps crunching behind her made her shoulders tighten. "You're up early," Russell said, his voice more gravel than usual. She didn't turn. Always have been. He came to stand beside her, leaving a respectful distance. They both looked out at the horizon. Neither spoke for a long time. "I didn't know how to talk to you back then," he said finally. "Still don't really." She glanced at him. "But you're trying now." He nodded slowly. "I suppose I am." A gull cried above them, wheeling against the lavender sky. "I watched your career," he said. "From a distance, after you left. I kept tabs. Your studio launches your gallery show in Soho, the magazine spreads. Didn't want anyone to know, but I followed it all." Camille felt a cold flicker in her chest. "You erased me from the family, but subscribed to my newsletter." He winced, but didn't argue. "That was wrong. I see that now." She said nothing. He took a breath. "The business, it's not what it was. We lost a major investor this quarter. Our branding is outdated. We're losing younger clients. I've tried consultants, agencies. None of them get it." She turned toward him slowly. "What are you asking, Russell?" He looked at her for the first time, really looked. His eyes were tired, his face more lined than she remembered. "I want you to help rebrand Barrett Commercial. Not just redesign our image, reshape our identity. We need elegance, edge, something human again." Camille laughed, dry and sharp. "You want the daughter you disowned to save the family name. Betita ciao. I want the professional who knows how to tell stories people remember." She crossed her arms, the wind tugging at her sleeves. "Why now? Why not a year ago? 5 years ago?" He hesitated, then said something she hadn't expected. "Because I'm sick." She froze. "It's not terminal," he added quickly. "But it's serious, a heart condition. I've been in and out of private care. Not many people know yet, but I'm not at full capacity. I need someone I trust." She narrowed her eyes. "You trust me? Professionally, yes. Personally, I'd like to try." She let that hang. Then, "If I do this, it's under my terms." "Of course." "Full creative control. You don't get to override me with old school marketing. I choose the language, the visuals, the campaign tone. You listen. Understood. My team, my rates. No family discount." He gave a dry chuckle. "Naturally. Public credit. My name attached to everything. No backroom NDA to keep me invisible." He nodded more slowly this time. "One more thing," she added. He waited. "If I sign on, I won't be a savior. I won't come to family dinners. I won't smile for holiday photos. This isn't a reconciliation, it's a contract." His expression didn't change, but something in his posture softened. "That's fair," he said. She extended her hand. He took it. For the first time in their history, Camille and Russell Barrett shook hands not as father and daughter, but as client and creative director. And for once, she set the terms. Camille had never planned on returning to the family home for Thanksgiving. But this year, she sent the invitations herself. She rented out a catering team from a woman-owned business in Montauk. She had the furniture on the back patio rearranged into one long coastal modern banquet table with deep blue linens, pale ceramic plates, and elegant wildflower arrangements. Gone were the stiff white china and beige napkins of past Barrett holidays. This year, Camille's table would look like her unapologetic, intentional, and free. The family trickled in as golden hour bled across the horizon. Elise arrived first, kids in tow. Maya looked older than Camille remembered, 13 going on 30, dressed in corduroy and confidence. She gave Camille a small smile that carried more weight than a hug. "You're really doing this," Elise said, eyeing the setup. "I am." She nodded. "It's beautiful." Next came Nathan with his wife and son, both looking slightly nervous. Camille greeted them with calm ease. The point wasn't vengeance, it was reclamation. Even Uncle Charles showed up, likely lured by the rumor of high-profile guests. He wore a camel-colored blazer and that same condescending smirk. Camille smiled at him like a host greeting a placeholder. Margaret arrived with a floral-wrapped hostess gift. Russell followed, more measured, now walking slightly slower. No cane, but a quiet humility in his movements that hadn't been there before. He took in the table, the people, the ocean view, and nodded. As the guests found their seats, they noticed unfamiliar faces, too. At the far end of the table sat Evelyn Tran, Camille's mentor from her early gallery days, the woman who had once offered her a place to crash in Brooklyn when she had nowhere else to go. Beside her was Gloria, Camille's studio manager. To their left sat Darren and Lena, an older gay couple, who owned a framing shop and had become Camille's second family during her early freelance years. It was a table split down the middle, one half by blood, the other by choice. Maya tugged Camille aside as the first course was served. "Can I show you something?" Camille followed her behind the garden hedge. Maya pulled out her phone and tapped open an album. It was full of portraits, black and white, all natural light. Some moody, some playful, but all filled with life. "You took these?" Maya nodded. "They're part of a project I'm working on, inspired by your exhibit last year, the one with the street musicians. I want to do something like that, but with women in my neighborhood. Moms, daughters, the way they really look, not how they're supposed to." Camille's heart expanded in her chest. "They're good, Maya. Really good." Maya smiled. "I was afraid to show them to Mom. I thought she'd say it was a waste of time." Camille looked across the lawn where Elise was holding her youngest. "She won't say that anymore." Back at the table, the second course was being served when the inevitable crack in the facade arrived. Tom, Elise's husband, leaned too far into his wine, as always. He slurred something about creative hobbies being cute little detours from real success. Camille watched Elise freeze her jaw stiff. Tom turned to Maya. "So, photography now. What happened to debate team something useful?" Before Elise could respond, Camille stood. "Actually," she said, her voice even, "Maya's portraits show more vision and truth than most corporate campaigns I've worked on." Everyone looked up. Camille walked around the table holding a small box. She stopped in front of Maya and opened it. Inside, a brand new Canon camera. Light, professional, perfect for beginners but capable of brilliance. "Shoot the world how you see it," Camille said loud enough for everyone to hear. The silence that followed was a different kind. Respectful. Witnessing. Tom opened his mouth, but Elise placed a hand on his arm. Not a plea, a warning. He closed it. Later, as dessert was served miniature pies and cinnamon galettes, Evelyn clinked her glass. "I've known Camille since she was living off grilled cheese and processing film in a bathroom sink," she said. "What she built wasn't luck. It was survival and vision. Don't let anyone here tell you otherwise." Margaret said nothing, but her eyes glistened. Russell raised his glass. "To reinvention, and to knowing when to ask for help." Camille didn't toast. She watched. She listened. Her power wasn't in applause. It was in presence. After everyone left, she stood alone on the patio. The wind was stronger now. The sea darkened, but she was not cold. For the first time in years, she felt like this house, this land, didn't reject her. It recognized her. This table wasn't just about one holiday. It was a declaration she was no longer the guest. She was the architect. The Barrett commercial boardroom hadn't changed much since Camille was a child, sleek walnut table leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the skyline. But this time, Camille wasn't here to be ignored. She arrived alone, dressed in a black blazer over an ochre silk blouse, her laptop tucked under one arm. Russell had already briefed the board about her appointment, but this was the formal contract signing and the reintroduction of a daughter once erased. Charles cleared his throat the moment she entered. "We were under the impression this would be a short-term consulting engagement." "Not," Camille set her laptop on the table and looked him squarely in the eye. "I'm not here to consult. I'm here to rebuild, and I've already started." She tapped a key. The screen behind her lit up with mock-ups, a cleaner, bolder Barrett logo, a campaign centered on human stories in real estate, testimonials in elegant serif fonts layered over portraits. "Our image was aging out," she said. "Our competitors are connecting emotionally. Barrett has been selling glass and steel. We need to sell legacy, experience, trust, and people." Charles scoffed. "People don't buy trust." Camille clicked to the next slide. charts, engagement metrics, competitor benchmarks. Then an email chain projected on screen. Their last investor had noted the firm felt detached and obsolete. "Receipts," she said, calmly. "Would you like me to read them aloud?" Russell shifted in his seat, hiding a smirk. Charles sat back silenced. Camille handed Russell the contract. "Creative director, independent contractor. I retain full artistic control. You provide budget access and credit. No edits without sign-off." Russell signed without a word. Camille followed, then took a photo of the signed page and emailed it to her attorney. By the end of the month, the new campaign was live. Real stories, real families, real places. Camille brought in photographers she'd trained, videographers she trusted, and built a content series that took off faster than any internal marketing attempt in years. A week later, Barrett Commercial's site listed Camille Barrett as lead brand architect. Her profile included a full bio studio portfolio and linked to her public work. The family couldn't ignore it, neither could their clients. The campaign not only stabilized the business, it brought in 2 new high-profile contracts. Margaret stared at the homepage for a long time one evening. Camille's face on the banner. The tagline she'd written herself, "We don't sell buildings, we frame legacies." She said nothing. But when Russell walked by and glanced at the screen, she didn't close the browser. For once, she let it stay open. Winter came early that year. The sky hung pale and expectant, and frost laced the windows of the Barrett house. But inside, things were warmer. Not fixed, but warmer. Camille stopped by one afternoon to deliver final invoices. Margaret asked her to stay for tea. They sat in the sunroom, soft classical music playing in the background. No staff, no pretense. Margaret poured without speaking. Camille stirred honey into her cup. "The website looks good." "So I've heard," Margaret replied. She looked down. "I had no right to doubt you." Camille sipped her tea. "But you did." Margaret didn't deny it. "You remind me of someone I once wanted to be, before all of this. You could still be her," Camille said softly. They sat in silence for a while. Not reconciled, but not hostile. Something between. When Camille stood to leave, Margaret placed a small box in her hands. Inside, an old black and white photo of a younger Margaret camera slung around her neck. "I used to shoot film in college," she said. "I stopped when I married your father. It didn't fit the plan." Camille closed the box gently. "Maybe it's time to start again." That night, Elise sent a text. "Thank you for showing my daughter a different kind of strength." Camille read it twice, then 3 times. A few days later, an email arrived from Maya. Subject line: "My first page shoot attached were 6 senior portraits, sunlit, candid, quietly stunning." Camille smiled, replied, "You captured something real. They'll remember this forever." She printed the best shot and framed it in her studio. A reminder. On New Year's Day, Camille walked the beach again. Same tide, same sky. But she didn't walk with fists clenched, or with defiance in her chest. She walked because it was hers. She walked in peace. The wind tugged at her coat and gulls cried above, but inside she felt still. Some wounds hadn't healed. Maybe they never would. But they didn't own her anymore. She smiled into the wind and kept walking.